Here's a shocking truth. Pontiac never intended to build America's first muscle car. In 1959, when the brand was seen as outdated, a group of young engineers secretly created an engine so powerful, GM nearly banned it. That engine was the Pontiac 389 V8, born out of desperation, yet destined to ignite an entire generation. It wasn't planned in a boardroom. It wasn't officially approved. In fact, it was hidden under a fake project name just to avoid detection. But when it roared to life, Detroit woke up. Pontiac went from Grandpa's car to a symbol of speed, and the 389 became the beating heart of the legendary GTO. Behind it all lies a story of rebellion, deception, and one daring decision that changed automotive history forever. By the late 1950s, Pontiac was facing its darkest days. Branded as the old man's car, sales were collapsing, the image was outdated, and GM executives were ready to shut the division down. In their eyes, Pontiac had no future. But deep inside the engineering department, a small team of young rebels dreamed of something different. Led by Seaman Bunky Knudsen, the newly appointed general manager, and the brilliant engineer John Z. DeLorean, they believed that performance and power could save Pontiac from extinction. Knudsen urged his team to break the rules, abandon the safe designs, and inject racing spirit into every car they built. DeLorean knew that survival meant creating an engine powerful enough to make Detroit take notice. And the Pontiac 389 V8 wasn't a completely new invention. In fact, it was developed from the foundation of the 1958 Pontiac 370 V8, the same block, but refined with precisions to achieve strength far beyond expectations. The core design remained unchanged: a cast-iron block, a 90-degree layout, and a centrally mounted camshaft, Pontiac's engineering trademark. But inside, the details told a different story. Engineers enlarged the pistons, adjusted the compression ratio, improved airflow through the intake, and altered valve angles to help the engine breathe freely at higher RPM. Those minor refinements were transformative, turning the 370 into 389 cubic inches of smooth, relentless power that stunned even Pontiac's own test drivers. The biggest leap forward came with the tri-power system, 3 carburetors working in perfect synchronization. At light throttle, only the center carb operated. But once the pedal hit the floor, all 3 opened wide, pouring fuel into the cylinders like a tidal wave. The roar that followed was deep and primal, the kind of sound no one forgets after hearing it once. It wasn't just noise, it was a declaration from engineers who refused to settle for ordinary. And here's what few people knew. The 389 project was never officially approved by GM John DeLorean, and his team secretly buried it under a special technical development budget to avoid corporate oversight. Their intention wasn't to make history, only to give Pontiac an edge in NASCAR. In 1959, the Pontiac 389 V8 made its debut under the hoods of the Bonneville, Catalina, and Star Chief, 3 large, comfortable cruisers built for smoothness rather than speed. Yet within months, the 389 had America buzzing. Automotive magazines called it a beast in a business suit. With power ratings from 280 to 348 horsepower, depending on configuration, it turned these 2-ton Pontiacs into shockingly fast machines. While Ford and Dodge struggled to perfect their transmissions and gear ratios, Pontiac had quietly stepped into a new era, one fueled by performance and emotion. Buyers were stunned when a Bonneville hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds, unheard of for a full-size car in 1959. Dealers across the country couldn't keep them in stock, and Pontiac's sales skyrocketed by more than 30% that year. Even GM's top brass couldn't hide their surprise. The very engine they once labeled too risky had become the company's new source of pride. For the first time in years, Pontiac was spoken of with admiration and envy. After the roaring success of the 389, it seemed Pontiac had entered its golden age. But behind closed doors, a quiet battle was brewing, not on the racetrack, but inside General Motors itself. In the early 1960s, GM issued a strict internal policy. No engines larger than 330 cubic inches may be installed in intermediate-sized cars. The rule was meant to prevent inter-brand competition within the corporation, ensuring that Chevrolet stayed at the center of GM's hierarchy. In short, Pontiac wasn't allowed to turn its mid-size cars into performance machines. To most executives, it was a reasonable decision. But for John DeLorean, it was nonsense. He knew that young buyers were craving lighter cars with real power, something that GM didn't yet offer. So DeLorean and his small team devised a plan that was as brilliant as it was daring. Install the 389 V8 into the Pontiac Tempest Le Mans, but do it under the radar. They did this by bending the rules, just enough to avoid breaking them. The 389 wasn't listed as a factory engine. Instead, it appeared as a dealer-installed performance package, technically making it an accessory, not a standard option. On paper, Pontiac remained in full compliance with GM policy. In reality, they were creating something revolutionary. When the first 1964 Tempest GTOs rolled out, they shocked all of Detroit. A mid-sized coupe, light in weight, powered by the mighty 389 V8 pushing 348 horsepower, it was something no one had ever seen before. The press called it a storm in the shape of a Le Mans. GM panicked when they found out, but it was too late. Customers were already obsessed. From that moment, the 389 entered its age of dominance. It wasn't just an engine. It was a declaration of youth, rebellion, and freedom. Pontiac dealers couldn't keep up with demand. Across America, GTOs began flooding the streets, their exhaust notes becoming the soundtrack of weekend nights. By 1965, Pontiac pushed the 389 even further, reaching 360 horsepower in high-performance versions. The GTO was now America's poster child for power, forcing Ford, Chevrolet, and Mopar to scramble in response. To the public, the GTO and the 389 within became nothing less than the embodiment of American strength. Pontiac had reached its peak, but within that brilliance, the first cracks began to show. GM's top executives grew uneasy, fearing that Pontiac was pushing too far, stepping beyond the role it was meant to play within the corporation. Chevrolet was GM's golden child, and Pontiac's sudden dominance in sales and reputation stirred internal tension. Quiet directives spread through the ranks: limit GTO advertising, cut development funding, and force Pontiac to share technology with Chevrolet. DeLorean quickly realized that this victory wasn't being celebrated, it was being controlled. Technically, the 389 began showing weaknesses. Its 650-pound mass made the front end heavy. It ran hot, and maintenance became difficult. On endurance tests, engineers reported piston failures at sustained high speeds, clear signs the 389 was approaching its mechanical limits. Pontiac fought to remain on top, but pressure from GM and rising competition made it clear. The golden era of the 389 was coming to an end. And as Pontiac tried to hold on to its glory, a new storm was brewing on the horizon. The age of emission regulations that would soon rewrite the rules of performance. In 1967, new federal emission standards took effect. The 389, with its triple carburetor setup and high compression ratio, couldn't meet the requirements without losing its soul. Pontiac had no choice but to replace it with the Pontiac 400 V8, essentially an enlarged and tamed version of the 389 built to satisfy the EPA. But for enthusiasts, that change felt like a funeral. The 400 might have had more horsepower on paper, but it lacked the raw emotion of the 389, that deep growl, the explosive torque, the rebellious spirit that made it legendary. By the early 1970s, amid oil crises and tightening emission laws, the 389 survived only in memory. Pontiac continued to sell the GTO, but its heart was gone. And while GM saw it as a logical step forward, those who lived through that era knew that a part of America had disappeared with the roar of the 389. Yet strangely enough, even decades after its death, its legacy never faded. The 389 didn't just deliver power, it defined a way of life. It gave Americans the sense that freedom wasn't just in the flag, but in the throttle, in the sound beneath the hood, in the open road that stretched endlessly ahead. Without the 389, there would have been no GTO, Chevelle SS, Mustang GT, or Dodge Charger. All of them followed the path Pontiac had blazed in 1964. Throughout the 1960s, the 389 became the benchmark of American performance. It proved that true strength didn't need to be expensive, it only needed courage. Hundreds of thousands of young Americans grew up with its roar, believing it was the sound of freedom itself. Today, original GTO 389 tri-power cars are treasured relics, fetching over $150,000 at major auctions. But the 389's real worth lies far beyond numbers. It lives in the spirit of those who dared to break rules, and in doing so, created an era that will never return. If you've ever heard the roar of the Pontiac 389 V8, you know it wasn't just the sound of an engine, but the heartbeat of a generation. A time when speed meant freedom, and the open road was America's dream. Tell me what you think. Does the 389 deserve to be called the heart that started the muscle car era? And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join me as we uncover more hidden legends from Detroit, where steel and spirit still refuse to die.